Today on the final bar, a bit of a special event called The Pilot's Guide to Investing. I enjoyed putting together this three-part discussion talking about relating my experiences learning to fly a Cessna 172R with the process of being a mindful investor. And what I learned as I was flying around learning to fly the plane is there's so many similarities between taking the emotions out of your aviation decisions and taking the emotions out of your investment decisions. Ladies and gentlemen, this is The Final Bar. So everyone, welcome to today's show. My name is Dave Keller. I'm the Chief Market Strategist here at StockCharts.com in Redmond, Washington. Thanks for joining us every weekday after the close for the final bar. Today, a bit of a different format. We've prepared a three-part discussion relating flying to investing. I call it a pilot's guide to technical analysis. And what I learned from my experiences flying the airplane is, very quickly as you start to study aviation, you start to get behind and get in the cockpit and start to, to take control of things. It's a big part of that exercise is to take the emotions out of the consideration. You're faced with a lot of uncertainty. You're faced with unexpected circumstances. You have to prepare for emergencies. And every step of the way, I felt like I was always taking it back to investing and relating what I was doing to the process of trading, process of investing. There's just so many similarities because of that need to not react from an emotional standpoint, but to react from more of a practical, more of a rational standpoint, if you can. And it's all about managing those emotions effectively. So a lot of the tricks that I learned with flying, things like checklists and emergency preparedness and all of those things related so well. They were the exact same things I found would help me minimize behavioral biases in my investment decisions. So we're going to talk about the three main takeaways that I had. Be prepared, be aware, and be ready. And in this first segment, we're going to talk about that first point, be prepared. Before you ever get up in the air, there's this whole pre-flight exercise that you go through just to make sure that the plane is ready to fly, make sure that you as the pilot are ready to fly as well. Make sure you have all your ducks in a row. You know exactly what you need to do and when you need to do it. So here's our first segment called Be Prepared.
So the reason why this is important to me, I actually have spent about 80 hours in the air trying to learn to fly a Cessna 172R, which is a pretty classic training airplane. This is a picture of me soon after completing my first solo, which if you've tried to learn to fly or if you know people that have, it's a pretty big step where you're finally in the plane all by yourself. Your instructor gets out and you are on your own, getting the plane up in the air, and then if all is well, back safely to the ground again. Pretty good moment, and it was a huge learning and growing experience for me just trying to get to that point. I have so much more to learn with flying, and I have not completed my private pilot training yet. At some point, my wife agreed that she will give me the green light to go back up in the air, but I'm waiting for that moment. So for this point, I'm enjoying the experiences that I've had and just thinking about how they relate. The reason why I came up with this idea about Pilot's Guide to Investing is because of the guy that I'm standing with here. This is my flight instructor that got me to that point where I was taking my first solo. And what's funny is when we were up in the air, once you get up in the air, you've got a lot of time to kind of chat because there's not a lot to do when the plane is flying straight and level. And so I talked with my instructor. We talked about the markets because it turned out he would trade stocks on his own when he wasn't flying in the air. And so we would actually compare notes a lot about stocks and just ideas. And I would tell him what I'd been looking at that day, and we would sort of talk through it. And what was funny is over the course of those conversations, it became very clear how a lot of the characteristics of good pilots, I think, mirrored the characteristics of good investors. And it's things like how you deal with emotions, right? You are in an emotional state when you are flying an airplane. You have an emotional reaction to things going wrong or unexpected consequences or something. Same as with investing, right? You fear is what drives your investment decisions a lot of times, and for a lot of investors. So how you deal with those emotions, how you apply discipline to the investment process and the decision-making process in the air, I think, are very, very similar. So as I was thinking about this, it sort of, for me, came down to three parts, three clear ways that I felt that flying an airplane was very similar to trying to be a good technical analyst, be a good investor. The first one was be prepared. Flying is all about preparation. And before I learned or started to learn how to fly an airplane, I expected that I would get up in the air and that's where I would learn how to fly. What I did not realize is how much learning to fly happened before you ever got behind the controls of the airplane, because you had to learn about the mechanics and learn about the systems and learn about navigation and learn about the sensations you were going to feel. And you had to talk about things ahead of time. And so we're going to talk first about preparation and how you actually you're prepared as a pilot so that when things happen, you already have a game plan in mind, right? You're not surprised by things. The second thing is be aware, right? And there's an awareness that comes with aviation, right? You have to be aware of what's happening inside and outside the cockpit. I'm going to share with you a story from my own experience that taught me the value of situational awareness and how I think you need to have a good market awareness or good situational awareness as an investor. Third is be ready. So one of the things that I found is when you're flying an airplane, you always have to be prepared for something unexpected, right? The reason why you don't panic when something goes wrong is because you've trained for it consistently and religiously, and it's banged in your head so hard. Okay, when XYZ happens, you do ABC, and you don't have to think about it. There's no emotional reaction. You have an emergency plan in place, and I'll share with you how that is taught at the when you're trying to fly a plane, and then how I think it should be taught, or how you should think about it when you're investing. So for today, we're going to start with this first one, which is be prepared. What does that mean? Well, when you're learning to fly an airplane, as I mentioned, before you get up in the air, you do what's called a pre-flight planning process, right? And so there are a lot of different steps, and the main thing that you do is before you get up in the plane, you look at a map like this. This is called a VFR sectional, which is essentially an aviation map of the Seattle area where I'm living now. And so this is the SeaTac airport in the middle. This is Everett and Boeing Field and all the other surrounding areas. And what happens is you look at this map, and that's where you understand the airspace. You understand how planes are going to be coming into SeaTac, and you understand the altitude levels that you need to be aware of. You're seeing all the mountains and phone lines and cell phone towers and other things that could be potential obstructions, to make sure that you're clear of them. And so there's a lot of study done on these sorts of maps to make sure that you know what you're going to do before you get up in the air. And it's not just deep planning either. I think another thing to think about is when you're actually going into the airplane. My wife originally was super nervous about me getting behind the controls of an airplane. I said, listen, honey, if you check your car as thoroughly as we check an airplane before you get in there, the chance of something going wrong with the plane is minimal. I mean, it really is, because you've checked things so thoroughly, because you don't want to get up in the air and have something happen and have it be a mechanical issue that you could have caught had you checked it ahead of time. So there's a whole pre-flight checklist, and it's 100 some steps that each pilot takes before you get up in the air. And when I'm flying a Cessna, I follow the steps for that plane. When you get on a commercial airliner, when you're coming into the plane, if you look to the left next time, you'll probably see the pilot and co-pilot, and they're going through some checklists. It's probably electronic, and they're checking things off, but they literally go through, and one of them goes out onto the runway and checks all the mechanical parts, make sure things are operating correctly. So it's certainly part of it. So this is actually part of the checklist when you're flying a Cessna 172R. And this is actually when you're on the ground getting ready to start the propeller. So you turn the master switch on, you turn the beacon on, which is an emergency transmitter. You open the throttle a 1/4 inch, just a tiny bit. The mixture is a fuel to air mixture. And then you turn the fuel pump off, make sure that's off, because you don't really need it on the ground. And then this is, the latest of a bunch of steps you've already gone through. Assuming that everything checks off and that you've confirmed it's fine, you yell out the window, clear prop or something like that, and then you fire up the propeller. And 98% of the time, it fired up exactly how I expected, because I'd gone through all these systems. And so before you actually get up in the air, you have checked all sorts of things. You've powered up and down the plane by a couple different things. You've checked backup batteries. You've manually checked all the moving parts to make sure they move as expected. You put the engine way up, you put it way down, make sure it doesn't stall. So all these things are checked. So, again, anything can happen at any point, but what you're trying to do is have enough preparation that the chance of something happening that you don't or you aren't anticipating is minimal, right? It's always a possibility, but it's a low possibility. It's not a probability. So what's funny is, as investors, why do we not do as good as we could with what I would call a pre-flight checklist, right? And I know this especially from working with people learning technical analysis from the beginning. There's a lot of amateur technical approach. An amateurish technical approach perhaps would be to, basically look at the chart and say, all right, this looks pretty good, or do a couple, look at a couple indicators and say, all right, that's fine, and that's it. But the problem is that's not a consistent way to make money or to manage risk using charts. So when I teach technical analysis, and what I've taught at the college level, I actually teach it in checklist form. And I start with Dow theory. And you've heard, if you've watched the Final Bar, if you watch the show regularly, you've heard how often I say this is a trend of higher highs and higher lows. I bang it over and over because for me, Dow theory, just the idea of trend, is so simple and so powerful. We forget, we get caught up in narratives in what we're seeing, what we're hearing. We forget to just look at the basic thing. Is this in an uptrend or downtrend? Because everything else comes after that. Then I'm looking where we're at relative to key trend lines, relative to moving averages. Are there any price patterns, any key support resistance levels? Do we confirm it with any sort of momentum indicators of volume? What's the relative strength? And if I followed that checklist, I have then, at the end of the checklist, number 8, is I have earned the right to say whether I'm bullish or bearish.
So that was the first segment called Be Prepared. And again, I've enjoyed so much that the exercise of applying what I learned flying around, especially the pre-flight exercises, things like having a checklist and systematically walking around the airplane, going inside the cockpit, making sure all the systems are working right, firing up and down all the different systems, checking everything to make sure that you minimize the chance that there is a mechanical issue. And what you're also doing is going through the routines that help you as a pilot be prepared for what could be unexpected, right? What you're not sure may come or may not come. You also think ahead and have a plan for what's going to come next. So before I get up in the air, I know where I'm going to fly, I know how I'm going to navigate there, I know what things are going to look like, I have a sense of what I'm going to see. And as an investor, how often do we take a position, take a trade, change a position, and don't have a good game plan for what we are expecting, but also know what we're going to do in an unexpected situation. So preparedness is so important. This next segment is called Be Aware, and one of the most important things you can do as a pilot is have an awareness of what's going on around you, both inside the airplane and outside the airplane. They call it situational awareness, to make sure you don't go fly into some situation that's not a good place for you and the airplane. So here is segment number 2 called Be Aware.
It's funny, as investors, we tend to put the blinders on. We tend to sort of focus on our particular portfolio, our particular investment horizon, a specific security or type of security asset class that we're looking at. But I found the most effective investors have a good awareness of what's going on around you, right? What's happening in all the other places. At any one moment, you have the ability to buy or sell literally thousands of different securities, right? Tons of equities, ETFs, and to say nothing of all the other asset classes. So having an awareness of what's happening, what's working and what isn't, from a technical perspective, I think is optimal. That's how you optimize your approach. My own firm called Sierra Alpha Research, the reason why I called it Sierra Alpha Research was from pilot slang, SA, for situational awareness. And to explain why that's important, I will share with you a quick story of golfing with my father years ago. And we were basically at the tee box, a par 3 hole. We stand up, it's about 170 yards. My father, who can outdrive me, picks out like a 6-iron or something and is getting ready to swing it. And in a vacuum, on paper, that's the right club for that distance. That's about what he should be hitting to get the ball right on the green, pretty close to the hole. But 2 things that he missed when he stood up and addressed the ball. Number 1, there was a headwind. So the wind was actually coming at us a little bit. The second thing was the green was a little elevated, meaning he was hitting the ball uphill. So any of you that have golfed before, think about what those 2 things would do if you hit that perfect 6-iron shot on the tee box. The headwind coming at you, slowing down your ball. The elevated green means you don't have as much distance, essentially. And so you're right, your ball falls short, right? He hit it short of the green. So What that meant, he had the right club, he had the right toolkit. And I think as investors, a lot of times we have at times a proper toolkit, but we're missing the awareness. He didn't have a good enough awareness of what was happening around him to see that the conditions were a little different, and meant he had to adapt his toolkit for changing conditions around him. Now, as a pilot, what I'm showing you here is an image of what the Cessna 172 cockpit looks like. This is sort of the dashboard. This is the panel below, so you can see outside the dashboard. You can see outside what's happening around you. But this is the series of tools that you have to look down and use to fly the plane correctly. And situational awareness, that concept of what's happening around you, is incredibly important as a pilot. And my story with this was my first night flight. I'm flying through the air, and my my flight instructor is looking. He says, all right, if you look, around 10, 11 o'clock, do you see anything that's kind of important that you need to pay attention to? So I look sort of, straight and to the left, and I look on the horizon. I don't really see anything. So I said, no, I don't. And he's like, all right, sure, around 10, 10:15, you're sure there's not something you need to know? And so now I'm starting to sweat a little bit, and I look over to the left. Sure enough, I see an airplane kind of coming right toward us. So I mentioned it to him. He's like, yep, you're right. You're on a collision course. And so he pushed the yoke forward, pushed us down a couple hundred feet, took us right below this other plane. We came right back to our normal altitude and kept flying. The other plane never budged, basically didn't see us, and was continuing to go on. So the chances of us actually, connecting with another plane in midair, it's actually pretty hard to do, because there's a lot of things to worry about. But he certainly avoided what could have been a very tense situation of us flying way too close to another airplane. And it was a beautiful reminder. I always thought back to that moment of situational awareness. What had happened was I was so focused on the instruments, on the map, on the kneeboard that was all in front of me, that I wasn't paying enough attention to the horizon, looking around and making sure that there weren't other planes or clouds or something that I was running into. It was a great reminder of the importance of having an awareness of what's happening around you. So what does that mean for you investing? Well, I would tell you that the good news is, if you have the StockCharts platform, which I'm sure most of you do, you have the ability to have a good awareness of what's happening around you. So I always have coached my clients, situational awareness as an investor means a good market awareness. It means you're understanding what's happening around you as an investor. So my morning coffee routine, the routine that I use every morning, is going through the series of charts that you see on here. And this is just the bookmarks in Chrome, so you can get a sense of what it is. It starts with a long-term 5-year weekly chart of the S&P 500, then a 1-year daily chart of the S&P 500. So before I see anything about what's happening with the markets, I'm looking at a good long-term chart that helps me understand a long-term frame of mind. I want to make sure that I'm plugging into that time frame that I'm trying to win on. And as you go through the titles of these different lists, you can see that it's going through other asset classes, global markets, breadth, sentiment, ratios, and so forth. And if I follow each of these steps, it is impossible. It's virtually impossible for me to get caught off guard by what's happening with the markets, because I've looked at all those visual cues. So my encouragement to you, I think the second step of awareness, is to take the lesson of flying, where you have to have a good situational awareness around your cockpit. As an investor, you have to have a good market awareness, a good awareness of what's happening around you. Use charts and use the StockCharts platform to cover all of those different asset classes, all those different levers you can pull, so you make sure you're not caught off guard. So if you do want to sort of improve your routine along these lines, if you go on StockCharts to your dashboard, you can go to Manage Chart Packs in the upper right corner, go down to the chart pack named David Keller Morning Coffee Routine. You can install this exact list into your StockCharts account. You can start with this. I'd encourage you to create your own and adapt what I've shared with you, but should be an interesting way to kick off this process or improve your process.
So it's funny, when I ran my own research firm, I called it Sierra Alpha Research, and that's the slang Sierra Alpha for situational awareness, which is the idea that pilots have an awareness of what's going on inside the cockpit, outside the cockpit. And I've had a number of experiences where early on flying, where my instructor would point out things I should be seeing that I wasn't. I find with novice investors, it's a similar challenge, right? You point out things where certain things are moving, you point out certain patterns on the charts, and you're just not comfortable with that sort of routine. Again, the more routines that you go through, the more you have a disciplined way every day, every week, whatever, to review what's happening around you as an investor, I think the better equipped you are to understand your surroundings and make better decisions. Now, this third segment is called Be Ready, and a lot of Learning to fly is about emergency preparedness. The future is unknown. You don't know when something unexpected is going to happen. So you have to have a good set of steps that you follow just to make sure that in the case of an emergency, you know exactly what to do. So it's not an emotional reaction. It is a practical, disciplined reaction. So here's our third segment called Be Ready.
We're going to finish up with that third piece, which is to be ready. And what I've learned, again, in my time learning to fly a Cessna 172R is basically you are taught to be ready. And so things are drilled way ahead of time to help you prepare for unforeseen circumstances. And it's basically what happens in an emergency situation. As a quick example, I'm smiling in this picture, but I was not smiling on the day I'm going to tell you here shortly. We basically, it was the first time I was trying to stall the airplane on my own. And if you're familiar with flying, it's probably you'll know what I'm getting at. But if not, stalling is actually very dangerous. And it's not like stalling your car where the engine stops and you have to restart it. Stalling the airplane basically means you tip the angle of the wings, of the leading edge of the wings, to the point where it can no longer generate lift. So you basically have these two long wings sticking out of the body of the airplane, and you put the plane in a condition where the wings can no longer lift you up. And as a result, you start going down very quickly. And you practice it. You go up to like 6,000 feet, and that's where you practice these conditions, and you do it so that you know how it feels, you understand the sensations, and you're drilled. It's drilled into you. When it usually actually happens is right during takeoff and right during landing. And if you think about that, if you lose altitude very quickly and you're right near the ground, things end very poorly, and that's when stalls can be very, very dangerous. So what you do is you go way up in the air, you go out to a practice facility, make sure that our practice area, you make sure no one's around you, and then you recreate the conditions of a takeoff, you recreate the conditions of a landing, and then you basically force the plane to stall. You put it in the condition where the wings can't lift you anymore. And what happens, I'll tell you, the first time it happens, my palms literally are sweating as I'm explaining what it is, because it gets you so much. But the reason why you do it is because the first time you totally panic. It feels very uncomfortable because you lose a ton of altitude. It feels like you're going to go straight down. But what you learn is that sensation. So if any time during an actual takeoff or landing you get that same sensation, you know what to do. And you say, yep, I do this and this and this, and you follow the procedures. The first time I was actually given the controls, and my instructor had done some stalls and I'd experienced them for a number of flights, and it was finally my turn. What happens when you stall is basically all you're supposed to do is alleviate the pressure. You have to yank the yoke, the stick. You have to pull it way back pretty hard to get the plane to tip up enough that it stops flying. And what happens when you start stalling is you just pull, you just ease off the pulling a little bit. You sort of ease off on the controls, and it'll move around a little bit. Overall, the plane will recover pretty easily once you know what you're doing. The first time I did exactly what I was told not to do, which is instead of alleviating the pressure, I pushed forward aggressively. And what happens when you push forward aggressively is you literally go in a nosedive. Luckily, I had an instructor in with me. He took the controls right back, pulled out the throttle, pulled us black. We lost probably 1,500, 2,000 feet in a matter of seconds, and we recovered very nicely and landed the plane just fine. And it was a tough experience. It took me a while to sort of recover mentally from that, but eventually it was a super cool moment when I actually was able to stall the plane on my own with no one in the plane. I felt like I'd accomplished something pretty cool. But the whole point of me explaining that story is you are taught what to do in the case of emergency. What if you stall? What do you do? And you don't want to have to look it up or try to rely on your emotional reaction to alleviate the problem that you're in. You want to follow a checklist, a very disciplined process to recover. So the picture that you're seeing was actually when I was doing one of my long solos, and I was actually flying from Connecticut down to Rhode Island, back up to outside of Boston, where my home airport was. And I was sort of on the way back. I'd done all the required maneuvers. I'd landed the plane and took off a couple times at different airports. And I was on my way back. So I was pretty excited, as you can see from the selfie that I took in midair. To the right of the airplane, off the right wing here, what I'm doing is I'm showing you the city of Providence, Rhode Island. You can see the buildings maybe in the middle of there. And this is what Providence looks like from there. It's beautiful, right on the water. You can see the harbor coming in there for the downtown area. But while I was taking selfies and while I was taking pictures of Providence, I also was doing some emergency preparedness. And what you're taught as a pilot is to always have a backup plan in mind, regardless of what you're doing. Even if everything's just fine, you're flying straight level, what's your backup plan? And so off my left wing, this airport that you can kind of see the X-shaped two runways here, that's North Central Airport, just northwest of downtown Providence. I knew where that was. I knew if anything happened right at that moment, I knew I could turn to the left. I could bank over there and easily get to that. Even if I had no engine, no power, I had plenty of space to glide over there, plenty of altitude. So the lesson here is no matter what is happening, you don't wait for an emergency to start preparing. As investors, though, it's so funny how we do that exact thing, right? When things start to go wrong, that's when we decide it's a really good idea to think about risk management and think about how we're going to manage some potential downside, some potential capital loss. And so what I always tell, what have I told my clients for a number of years is when you take a position, when you start a position, when you have an opinion, that's when you develop your exit strategy. Before anything else happens, you say, I am long this security, and if XYZ happens, I'm going to get out no matter what. And don't think about it another moment. Write it down somewhere, program it somewhere, and be done. So the way that you actually do this, besides just when you're flying around, besides just knowing where you're at and having airports in mind, is you have a series of checklists that you follow. So yesterday we actually, or maybe on Tuesday, I want to say we talked about the pre-flight checklist, getting ready to get up in the air. This is one of the checklists you use in midair. And so if your engine cuts out, you're flying the plane I was learning, you follow this sequence. You basically get your airspeed to 65 knots, which means you can glide the maximum amount. You put the fuel shutoff valve in, mixture rich, and all of that is doing, and then fuel selector valve to both. All of those is just drawing as much fuel as possible from the two wings, which is where it stores the fuel. And then you check the ignition. And a lot of times you either turned off the fuel, it's not able to get enough of it, or you knocked the key out with your knee and checking the ignition, you find the key's not there and you can pop it right back in. And one of these 5 steps, more often than not, is going to fix the problem that you're in when you lost your engine. So as an investor, what's your emergency checklist? And I challenge you to think about what you do in the case of emergency. When something happens that's unexpected, do you have a set of steps that you're going to follow to make sure that you're not in a painful place? And Ned Davis, a mentor of mine, once told me, all large losses begin as small losses, right? So we don't want to hold on to losing positions, losing trades so long that they cause climactic pain in our portfolio. So I would refer you back to the technical checklist that I shared with you on Tuesday, which was basically have a set of steps that you follow to qualify whether or not you should still hold a position, right? So your emergency situation is you're owning Home Depot or whatever random ticker it is, and it starts to go down. It hits your threshold at which you want to revisit whether or not you still want to hold a position. What's on your technical checklist for you to determine whether or not you want to sell it? And it could be we're in an established downtrend, lower lows, lower highs. That might be an indication. We've broken down through some key trend lines. The moving averages have sloped downwards, and we've broken down through these key trend lines. We've broken down through a key support level, something like that, right? Relative strength. We might be underperforming its industry or its group in enough of a way that it would warrant revisiting the position. So my point to you is don't wait for a position to hurt before you develop your exit plan. Have the exit plan set up. And I would say, as the S&P is going to new highs right now, if you are long equities, now is a perfect time to decide what this exit plan is going to be for you, because at some point, I guarantee the market is going to move down and you're going to want to have a checklist ready to go.
So that last segment, be ready, is so important. And again, I think it's key. I've learned from flying those times when I realized I did not have a good exit strategy, especially early on, not knowing, if something would happen right now, what airport am I going to land at? What do I need to look for? What's a suitable place to land? What altitude do I have, and am I able to get places safely? As investors, often we're sort of flying in midair, not paying attention to our altitude and where we could land, what's an appropriate place to land, what airports are nearby, all those things. So it's so important to have that sense of what to do if the unexpected happens. So as we've gone through this 3-step process of being prepared, being aware, being ready, I hope you found the relationship, or you've seen in some small way what I saw as I was learning to fly an airplane. The relationship between an aviator, between a pilot, taking the emotion out of the picture as much as possible, having a disciplined way of reacting to what's unexpected with the practice of investing. And it's so funny. One final comment is, there are physical sensations you feel when you're flying a plane and something goes wrong. Your palms sweat, you get nervous, your heart starts pounding. And how often have you had those same physical sensations in some sort of investment-related activity? That's how I know they're pretty similar. I hope you enjoyed this exercise going through a pilot's guide to technical analysis. Hope you found it to be fun. Thanks for watching The Final Bar. We'll be back live very soon. We appreciate you supporting us. For StockCharts.com in Redmond, Washington, I'm Dave Keller. Have a great night.
Hey guys, Grayson Rose here with StockCharts.com. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Remember, if you did, give us a like down below, leave us a comment. We'd love to hear from you. And most importantly, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for daily content from an incredible collection of technical analysts and financial minds. We'll see you back here very soon. Happy charting, my friends.